Okay. Good afternoon, good morning to some. Welcome to today's webinar. Thanks for joining us again. We're happy to have you back in most cases. I think we've had a couple of new people join on since the first webinar a couple of weeks ago, so welcome to everybody. This is the webinar called Public Gardens as Sentinels Against Invasive Plants, using the database to share your garden's plant list. So this is webinar number 2 of 2, and I'm with Claire Ryan and Sai Ravichandran, and we're all sitting right here at the Morton Arboretum. So the three of us are sitting right here at the same desk. So we're all going to deliver the webinar to you today from the Morton Arboretum, and we're happy to have you. So I know some people are logged in and some other people will continue to log in. So just a quick reminder, I have everybody on mute. So please use the chat box if you have questions. We'll be monitoring that throughout the webinar, and we should have time for questions at the end of this. So we hope we can get to all the questions. And what else? Oh, and I should point out that this is being recorded as well. We're going to add this webinar, we're going to put this online, and then we'll send it back out to the whole group as well, so everybody can reference this webinar in the future as well. So my name is Kurt Dreisilker, and I'll be starting us off today. Again, here are we're real people, so here are some images of us.
We're real.
Yeah. So my role is the head of natural resources and collections horticulture at the Arboretum. We have Claire Ryan, who's the program coordinator for Midwest Invasive Plant Network. Both of us joined and led the webinar last time. And today, since we're talking about the database, we have Sai Ravichandran in the webinar as well. She's the Morton Arboretum's Director of Information Technology. So we're happy to have Sai with us today as well.
We'll give her all the hard questions.
That's right. So we have lots of time for hard questions for Sai, so they're great. So today we're going to talk about the database, but I want to start off just by starting at the top again with the overall purpose of our initiative that we're calling Public Gardens as Sentinels Against Invasive Plants. I think it's helpful to ground us and know where we're going overall, even though we focus on the database and the conversation later. So the purpose of our effort, really, to remind you, is that we want to document the spread of cultivated plants from within botanic gardens and arboreta. We want to utilize our collective observations, our expertise, and standardized data to help stop problematic species from becoming invasive. Note that I'm distinguishing between the problematic species and invasive species, so we're not equating those two here. And this is important because we oftentimes, within our collections, we include newly introduced plant taxa or obscure species that may be relatively new to the horticulture industry and may not be widely spread. And so we have sort of a unique set of data that we have access to within our collections, and we can use all of our professional observations and expertise to help stop plant species from becoming invasive in those rare situations. And we also, one of our purposes is to create a network of gardens to share information about plant species which are spreading from cultivation. So this is really a reminder that we're not just doing this within our own gardens individually, but we can create that network so we can, start to understand when trends are emerging across all the gardens that are participating. And so then we can engage our professional networks to steer development away from problematic taxa. So all of us within our day-to-day roles within our different gardens, we have access to different people and different sectors outside of the public garden sector that we can inform them about what we're seeing with this. So we can share this information and again hope to help stop the spread of or prevent invasive species, I should say. Okay, so if you were with us last time, you heard about how this started, and so just a quick point here. At the Morton Arboretum, we hosted a garden summit that we called Plants on the Move, How Public Gardens Can Help Control Invasive Plants. We held this in late 2016, And you can see the 5 points here that I've listed from last time and discussed at length last time as well. I just want to point out that we're going to talk about number 4 and 5 for today. So number 4 is that one of these outcomes from that conversation back in 2016 was that we would develop a platform, or that a platform is actually needed for gardens to contribute and share observations when plants escape cultivation. So we're here. We're now going to show you this platform. And so I'm going to talk about that. We are going to talk about that today. And then also that it's important to garner input from more gardens throughout the process. So those are some of the key points that I want to focus on for today here. So after that, or as a result of that Garden Summit in 2016, a smaller working group was formed, and you can see this image of the group as well as logos from our various organizations. This working group is really the engine behind all of this work that has been happening. And this group has been meeting regularly, I would say monthly, to continue conversations and delivering us to where we are at the moment. So this is really the group that has been carrying the torch, if you will. So we're happy to have results to share with you today. So after the working group began, we had an assignment, which was to really come together to figure out what this platform was going to look like. What is this database going to look like? A lot of people pointed out that we can find some existing platforms that are on the market, some apps and some databases of different types. And you know, the question was, well, maybe one of these will work. Can these work for our purposes? And so everybody had an assignment to evaluate 2 or 3 of these existing platforms. And we all came together at the Morton Arboretum back in 2018 then. We evaluated them. We discussed each of them at length, and we gave the vote. And you can see in the bottom image there, it's a very technical process of a thumbs up or a thumbs down process. And so we had a little bit of fun as well. But I assure you that we dug into each of these platforms and had a great deal of discussion about whether or not these existing platforms would work for this cause. And so we had a lot of good questions and good outcomes from that. And so I just want to point out some of these. The first outcome was that we decided on ultimately one customizable database. And again, we're going to focus on that today. We have had a lot of different apps that were available that we can download onto our smart devices, for example. And we talked about the pros and cons of those apps and the other databases that were available, but ultimately we focused on one database. And I'll keep you in suspense for a little bit longer before I talk more in detail about that. But we also figured out from this conversation, as well as subsequent conversations with the working group, that we're looking for taxa level data. We're looking not for accession or observation level data. So what do I mean by that? Some of these apps, for example, that are on the market, they are designed for a person to walk in the field and collect information about what they're actually seeing in real time and collect information about those observations. And so, you know, for example, as we wander around our public gardens, we might find that there are seedlings popping up in different areas. And so the app could be used in a way to actually track that sort of data. The concern that was raised as this group discussed this issue was that we were concerned that we may not have the full capacity for people within our staff to go out and collect these observations. And so we thought maybe this wasn't the best approach. So we steered away from the apps that were meant to function like that. Additionally, we decided that we weren't looking for accession level information either. And that was largely because, you know, we have many different accessions of perhaps the same species or the same taxon. And so what we're aiming for here is the garden's kind of summative information that represents their full experience with the taxa at hand. And so we're looking for that taxa level data that represents all of the garden's experience growing this taxa in cultivation. And so this also includes the idea that some of us have this information up in our minds, up in our memories, that may not actually be written down. And so from, perhaps several years ago or a decade ago or something like this, we may have these sort of case studies that we can recall and point back to, but there's really no written record of this kind of information. So it would be hard to actually get that level of detail as well. So we want to collect all of this. We want to harvest all this information and these observations from our recollections, from our memories as well. So these are sort of some of the formative ideas on what we're trying to, on how this database ultimately is collected, or designed, I should say. And then as part of this effort, in this room that you can see these images, this group decided to share their own lists of plants that have become problematic or invasive within their own garden. And so this was a really big eye-opener as well, because we realized that the gardens just at the table here already were collecting some of their own observations and some of their own information, but none of us was really sharing it with another garden, and we were all doing it differently, as you can imagine. Each of the data, each garden had their own way of collecting and their own philosophy and their own different way of handling that. So one of the major outcomes of this conversation was that we wanted to make sure that this data was standardized, so that when we designed this database, standardized data would actually go into the database and then produce the best quality results as a result of this effort. The standardized data is what we actually talked about last time in the webinar, and you can refresh your memory by looking at that webinar and reviewing that document that was sent out as a result of last webinar. Okay, so just a quick reminder again that this effort is, we want to develop standardized methodology that public gardens can use to list and categorize plants from their collections that have been observed escaping cultivation, and that these are not that this is not the same as an invasive plant list. Okay, so that's just a quick reminder. Additionally, we have this this document that was sent out last time with these guidelines for listing and categorizing the information from our gardens. We have these 4 categories that we've spent quite a bit of time discussing within the working group and getting feedback on. And so these are pointed out here as watch list down to assessed as invasive. And all of those meanings and the context for that is included in that main document that we sent out. So I'm not going to spend much time on that during this webinar. I just want to remind us that this is the data that we're looking for within the database. So in order to have the greatest impact in this initiative, we want to make sure that everybody's following these same guidelines as well. That's really a key point to start us off here. So what is the database? We're looking at Brahms. We're using what we've developed is a database called Brahms. This is an existing database to manage natural history. It stands for Botanical Research and Herbarium Management System. This is mainly used for managing natural history collections, botanic gardens, seed banks, field surveys, taxonomic research, and biogeographic studies. It's based out of Oxford University and is used widely across the globe. There are many different cases and uses of this, across Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America as well, and probably others that I'm not even familiar with. But we use it at the Morton Arboretum, and this is a key point. We presented Brahms as a potential alternative or a potential platform during the working group discussion back in 2018, but I assure you that the Morton Arboretum didn't just force this upon the initiative. So we offered it up as a tool to look at and review, and the working group really liked it and offered, and was interested in pursuing this as the source. Not to mention that since we do use it to manage our own collections, the living collections as well as the herbarium at the Morton Arboretum, we have this ingrained in our operations already. We have staff using it who are in charge of maintaining this and pursuing funding for improvements of it and so on. And so I'm sitting here with Sai Ravichandran, who this is under her purview. So she's actually engaged in the use of Brahms on a regular basis. And so this was thought very highly among the working group that this was a strong benefit as well to use it. And not to mention that this could be offered to participants of this initiative at no cost. And so that was another strong message in collecting feedback since the beginning of this whole conversation, that gardens were concerned about any sort of associated cost to roll out this initiative. And so since we're supporting this initiative already, since we're supporting the use of the database already at Morton Arboretum, then we're sort of taking on that cost as part of our operations. So all of these things were thought of as big positives, and so we decided to go ahead by using Brahms, but just modifying it to make it into what we want it to look like and to function the way we want it to function. So a little bit about the database, the concept behind what we're doing here. We have kind of the initial phase, which will take us through this first period, as well as kind of a next phase, which will take us longer into the future. So I'll explain what I mean here. So this initial phase is that the database is for public gardens by public gardens, and it's really only meant to focus within that sector. So it will be access controlled. There will be a password and ID function to just get access to this database. And once gardens are logged in, then gardens can contribute and access the data freely. And so this would offer a secure environment for gardens to contribute that data. One of the pieces of feedback that we've received as part of this whole initiative is that some gardens aren't comfortable with the idea of releasing all of this information to the broader public or to other sectors. There might be some confidentiality or some concerns about some of the data. And so this secure environment was offered up as a potential benefit to alleviating that concern. But at the same time, also the gardens can understand, by having this access, gardens can understand what's happening at other gardens. So perhaps even informing their own operations. So in other words, once the garden is logged in, they can see this data that's actually been contributed from other gardens. And it would ideally be kind of a free access to all this data that's being contributed to the database from all these different public gardens. And so, but even though there is potentially some sensitivity to some of this data, some gardens may be more reluctant to share this so widely. Other gardens may be more willing to do that. This structure will help to facilitate the fact that gardens are really leaders in this effort. We have access and expertise to our collections, and we can use this to benefit this initiative to help prevent future species from becoming invasive. But how do we connect the garden sector to the broader the interest of the horticulture industry or invasive plant species councils is another conversation that I'll get into as well. This initiative, the Public Gardens as Sentinels Against Invasive Plants, will develop perhaps a summary report this year. Actually, that's the intention. We will be doing this. So this year, what we'd like to see is that gardens start using the database and contributing their own data into this database throughout 2020. And so by the end of this year, the working group can look at that data and then put out some sort of a summary report showing maybe some trends or some flags that might need to be raised about what we're seeing. But that all depends on what data is actually entered into the database and what there is of substance to discuss. So more to come on that as we get this. And then the other thing is that this is sort of iterative development. We're considering this kind of a beta version at the moment. We'd like to get some feedback from people and from users, because that will make this into a better product as the result, and we'll be able to be more effective down the road. So your feedback is certainly welcomed as we move this forward. We'll send out another form and probably a couple of reminders throughout the year to request that feedback. And basically, the approach that we've been taking all along is that this old saying here is that if you want to go fast, you go alone. This is, and if you want to go far, you go together. So we're not moving forward as one particular garden. This is not, for example, the Morton Arboretum's initiative to just move this along and have everybody kind of catch up with what we're doing. And what we're trying to do is gather all this feedback from public gardens across the country, across Canada, and incorporate that feedback into how we're designing this. So that's a really important point, and is partially why we've been, we're several years into this, and really at this point now of releasing the beta version of the database. So we're very excited about the point where we're at, but there's still more work to do and more feedback to incorporate. So what's beyond 2020? The next phase, we'd like to engage other sectors. So we have public gardens collecting this information, contributing the data, but this ultimately, in order to be truly effective, we need to get the message out. And so even though there was some concern about sensitive topics or sensitive data within the public garden sectors, gardens at large felt like we should be using our voice to inform other audiences like propagators and landscape architects and so on to share this information about the use of these particular plant taxa. So gardens would contribute and access their data freely through that registration portal, but there would be some other layer of scrutiny or some other layer of access where these other sectors could log in to see their own data, but it might be obscured in some way, perhaps, if gardens have sensitivity to the issue. So we want to recognize that as well. But beyond 2020, we would imagine that this data set could be available for a broader audience beyond the garden sector. I guess that's what I'm trying to say there. Okay, so for now, I'm going to transfer this over to Claire Ryan, who's going to start walking us through the database. And just a quick reminder, if anyone has any questions, we will continue to monitor the chat box if anybody wants to use that, and I'll log those questions so we can answer those in a timely fashion. Thank you. Claire.
Yeah, so it's my pleasure to walk you through what we have and just kind of show you some of the features. I hope you guys will be excited by it as well. So this is a web-based application. It's built on Brahms Online, and this is what you see when we have the URL up. When you go to the URL, you don't see a lot. There's a home page that basically explains what the database is and why it's the thing. And then there's about, which has a little bit more about the project and some of the history, but that's it. Because, as Kurt kind of laid out, we're access controlled. So in order to get into the database, to submit data, or to view what's there right now, you gotta go up here and register an account. It's a moderated registration process. We essentially want to be sure that folks getting in at the moment are affiliated with a public garden. A question came up on the last webinar if this was only open to APGA member gardens. I think our answer there is no. It can be any public garden with information to share or with interest in this issue, but it does have to be a public garden. So now I'm logged in and things are going to get more interesting. You see we have other features here that I'll be showing you. We've got a search tool, ability to browse all the records, and then the submit, and that's actually what we're going to take a look at first, is how to submit data, because until data is submitted, there isn't a ton to look at in the other views. So there's going to be two ways that gardens will be able to contribute data. The first will be a bulk upload via XML file format. And it's going to be important for gardens that are interested in that option that the required fields be in there. Those are generally going to be the garden contact person, name and email, the garden name and location, the taxa, scientific name, and the ranks at a very minimum. And when we have the XML upload enabled, there'll be some guidance on what the data should look like to come in. And that'll launch when the database launches. We'll have a timeline a little bit later. But the other way to enter data, which I'm going to walk you through, is to enter it taxon by taxon using this input sheet. We have features in here to make it as painless and user-friendly as we can. It might be a good option for a shorter initial list. If it's, just a dozen or a couple dozen taxa, this won't be too bad. The other way we envision this sheet getting used too is to add information in subsequent years. So if you have revisions, new information, new taxa to add, or new or updates to make, you can use this sheet for those. So let's take a look at features of this sheet. It's laid out as you've probably seen other data input sheets with a little star for your required information. Up at the top is the user information. Essentially, we have two different blocks here, so you can identify a technical contact and an administrative contact if you want to, but it might be the same person. Next section is the information about the taxa. Now, we have 24,000 roughly taxa that are preloaded in here, and if you start typing a taxon name, it'll show you the options. Obviously you're going to put in the genus name first, and it would bring up everything we have preloaded in the genus. You start typing the species name, it'll narrow it down real quick to the species, and then you pick it from the drop down, click, and it auto-populates many of the fields in here. So we're trying to minimize the amount of information you need to think about. So all of this information that you see is auto-populated for the tax that we have loaded in there. Now, there's going to be option to add taxa, because I believe our list is probably pretty biased to temperate species. I think. You'll have to tell me, Sai, if I'm wrong there. But we certainly don't have all plant taxa that could conceivably be grown by botanic gardens in here. So the taxa will be able to be added either through bulk upload or through sensitive mouse, one at a time process. But we need to moderate that to make sure we're not getting in a mess taxonomically. So I think we'll have more guidance on that too as we go forward. Just another thing to point out on this view, we do have scroll over help buttons. You can see one right here. That'll generate a pop-up that basically just explains what kind of information we're looking for in certain fields. So keep going. This is the next couple groups of information on the entry form. The first being the garden information. You would type your garden name in here, and actually once you've done it and associated it with your account, it starts auto-populating for future entries. Lat long, these question bubbles explain it's not necessarily like the lat long exactly of your escape taxa. You can just use a general lat long for your garden. And then just other locational information. And then you get into the species report information. So what is actually being seen for this taxa at your site. And actually the only absolutely required information there is what rank according to the guidelines, the PGSIP guidelines you've assigned to that taxon. I think this will be of most use and most helpful if some of this additional information is filled in too. We have quite a few data fields. You can include information about the population size. Again, not like you're going to go out and count every single stem, but a ballpark or order of magnitude. Information about what kind of settings is being seen in. Are these cultivated settings only, adjacent garden beds, or are you seeing it spread to kind of maintenance areas, hedgerows, managed natural areas, that kind of thing? And then, and what degree of management is being used at the site where these are growing. And I think, those of us who work with invasive species all the time know there's a pretty big difference between something that can kind of only show up in cultivated areas that are more manicured, or maybe it can compete adequately with turf grass, compared to something that is able to compete successfully against other weeds or against desirable native species. So, yeah, and that's essentially our input tool. The cool thing about it too is that not with the bulk upload, but with that record input, your record will be added immediately for taxa that are loaded in the database. Like the preloaded taxa, you add a record, it appears immediately in the data. So how do you actually look through some of the data that gardens have submitted through the database? Well, there's a couple ways to do it. We wanted to make searching and finding information for gardens as easy as possible. So Sai and her team built this pretty straightforward search tool. Right now, it lets you search on the rank and the garden and taxon. I think it would be great if we could also add at some point like state or province to help narrow it down geographically a little bit. But that's what we have for the moment. And just for example, this is a drop down. You can choose any of these ranks. I think the garden field is auto-populated with gardens that have submitted data, and then the taxon is a free-form search. The other way to look at the data once it's in the database is through browsing all records. Now, when you click on the Browse All Records tab up here, this is what pops up. And I circled this botanical records. This is the default view, and you want to make sure it stays here. The other thing you can look at here is if you click on this little arrow, it'll give you the ability to look at all taxa. So that's everything, all the species that were preloaded that listed 24,000, plus anything anyone has added as an additional taxa would appear. But botanical records, that's the records that have been added to the database by gardens. That's what we really want to look at. So this view, you have a few different ways that you can find information that you're looking for. One neat tool, and anyone that's a big Excel user has probably done this in Excel, but you can sort on any of the parameters at all by basically clicking next to the heading. Oh, another thing I want to mention too is that we have a lot of headings here. These are all pretty well written out, but if they're collapsed, you can hover over these to get the full name of the data parameter. So that's pretty cool. And then you can sort by any of them. As I was saying, it'll do alphabetically and reverse alphabetically for the text entries. And then on the numeric ones, for example, this is the population size, it'll sort it numerically or reverse numerically. And the sorting function can help you implement a filter. Now, my example of filter here is actually the same thing we did on the search. Let's say we're really just interested in those watch list species. So that's the ones that are most likely to be not well known as invasive. This is the new information that gardens are bringing to this conversation through this category particularly. So let's say we only want to see records for watch lists. What I would do is I click on any place on here where it says watch list. It doesn't have to be the top record, it could be any record. And then click on the filter button, and it gives me the filter by watch list. So now I'm only seeing records for that. And you can do the same thing on anything in the spreadsheet or anything in the view. You can filter by garden. You can filter by the taxon, by the state, by country, county. There's a lot of different ways to cut this, and it's pretty powerful. It's more powerful than the search, but the search is easier. That's basically what to know about that. Another thing, though, is say you've gotten the information you're interested in from your filter and you want to see all the records again. This is the tool to do that. On the left side is just manage your filters, and you click on these bright red icons to get rid of your filter or add a new one. The other really neat tool in here is that you can map. You can either map all the records in the database, or you can map based on a filter. As you can see, at the moment we have a few data points, and we've took one from RGB or RBG, sorry, Holden, and here at Morton Arboretum. These are some of our working group members. But you have to get creative here and envision lots of data in this tool to see how this could be used. I think, eventually, once we get a lot of data points, we might have, essentially a heat map showing which gardens are sharing a lot of data on invasive species and on potentially a watch list species, and where are those gardens located. You'd be able to answer questions. So one thing to note here, it's not working yet, quite yet, but we're going to have the ability to color code according to these, to the ranks. So this will give you a pretty good visual cue about whether other gardens in your climate zone or in your immediate region or in your state are seeing a specific taxon that you would filter or search on, escape from cultivation. This tool also gives you a really good way to visualize whether any particular taxon is acting as aggressively at other gardens as it is at yours. For example, if you've ranked it, say, invasive because it's all over your site and it's all over the local flora as well. This will give you a good visualization if it's the same in other areas, or if there's something going on that your particular climate or particular site is just making this go gangbusters. The other way I think gardens could use this is to figure out what other gardens have experienced managing escape populations of specific taxon, and who to contact to get that information. And you actually say you're using the map to browse and find other gardens that are dealing with a certain taxon. You don't have to go back then to the table view to figure out who to contact, which I think is a pretty neat feature of this. You can go to this data summaries tab, and it'll provide you summarized records for the points you're seeing on the map, and it will have, for example, the contact name and email address associated with that record. So I think that's pretty powerful. And we plan here, those of us involved in the project, we're going to be using these same filters and searches to answer the bigger questions too. For example, things that we'll probably be looking at when we're putting together the summary report, things like how many watch lists and potentially invasive taxa gardens reporting, and does it differ significantly by region in North America? What are these taxa, and are they already prevalent in trade? Are there certain alerts or cautions that we could potentially issue to other stakeholder groups like plant propagators or invasive plant evaluators in the public or nonprofit sectors based on the strength of the data coming from gardens? So that's essentially the walkthrough of what this looks like and what the functionality is at the moment. And I'm going to hand it back to Kurt real quick to just kind of recap where we are and tell you where we're going. I had that go away. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Claire. So today we saw a little demonstration of the database, but after today, after we all hang up and go about our lives, I should point out some of these next steps of what we're going to do. So what we really encourage gardens to do is take a look at the guidelines that were sent out after the last webinar. That is really the first webinar that was just a couple weeks ago. Take a look at that and start implementing that. Those are the recommended guidelines that would be used in this database. So if you haven't done that yet, we really encourage you to go about that process, and then to access the database. So then you'll need to get access to the database. And so we, on our end, we're making a couple of last-minute edits and changes, and so we'll be ready to release that by the end of the month. And so we would be, we'll send out an announcement about that, and we'll have it open and ready for people to enter their own data. And so after that point, we want to hear about feedback that you guys as users are thinking about. And so I'll also send out another form to give you that capacity to give us that feedback, which is, I think, is a really an important component of this. Claire was, just showing a couple of examples of some of the search functions. Well, you may think of others that are useful as well. So we want to hear about that to make it as effective and useful as possible. And the working group is available for feedback. So we want to, make this a success. We want to help gardens through this process. This has been a long conversation on our end to get us to where we are, and we want to coach all the participants through this process as needed. And so if gardens are looking for some coaching or discussion, then we can be available for that process as well. And as a reminder, we are hosting a workshop at this upcoming annual conference for the American Public Gardens Association coming up in June in Portland. So you can look for us on the agenda. We'll have that, and several of our working group members will be present for that. That'll be a half-day workshop that'll coach people through this process, kind of what we've been hearing about, but it'll engage people in the room at the time and offer some live data entry potential as well. And then part of our plan for 2020 is to also engage other audiences outside of the public garden sector as well. So we want to have meaningful conversations with these other groups that would be interested in this data. Invasive plant species councils. We want to talk to plant propagator societies. We want to talk to landscape architects and the green industry and so on. And so we want to make sure that we have effective conversations with these other groups so that they can receive the information and ultimately get what they need out of this as well, and hopefully view this information as a reliable source of unbiased information, because really what this is information based on our collective observations it's not a risk assessment in any way. This is just data that we see. We see it within our gardens, and so we're making that information more broadly available. So that said, we want to thank you for joining us. Thank you to the team, to everybody who has been helping to pull this together. Sai, she didn't say much at this point, but I want to thank Sai Ravichandran from the Arboretum here for helping to pull this database together. She's done a tremendous amount of work on this. And I think that's about it for now, except we do have time for questions. So I think we'll just turn it over to our chat box to look at some of these questions. So the first question, I'm going to hand it over to Claire or Sai. It says, let's see here. Let me scroll back up. My apologies. So how does the database deal with synonyms? This is a very popular question. You want to take a stab at that, Claire?
Yeah, the synonyms are already there in the taxa table, so we have that information. So that's why we are going to have this whole process of inputting the taxa through a moderated means, so we are able to really have correct information about the taxa. So the synonyms are going to be handled through the information that is available in the taxa. Do you have any other specific information other than that you want us to address?
So if Sylvan, who was asking that question, wants to respond to Sai, maybe we'll give him a chance or her a chance to ask the question or to give more feedback. But thank you, Sai, for taking that. That's a really important issue and one that will be important throughout this process. Okay, so next question comes from Richard. Can ARBNet members access and contribute if not APGA members? So
yeah, I think our intention is essentially to take information from any site that has a collection that's intended to be viewed by the public, the non-kept collection. It doesn't, it doesn't require that, the garden has paid any membership to APGA or anyone else.
Yep. Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. The next question comes from Pam. How will taxon escape category changes be tracked over time and location?
So we are actually tracking the observations, right? And that's what we are tracking in the database. And that's where the PGSIP group is going to really determine whether a taxon should be classified to be with a particular escape species ranking. But every garden, as they observe what they think is the escape species ranking they want to give to the taxa, is going to be added to the observation database. So there will be a date and what they provide in terms of location that will be added to these observations, and we'll be able to see if a garden suddenly decides that, well, this is not the escape species ranking this year, but last year we called it something else. So that over a period of time, any observation submitted by a garden would be in the database.
Right. So I think this is just reiterating what Sai said, but say you have a list, you make it this year, and then in 2024 you review it and you update the ranking of 5 species, taxa, let's say. And so what you would do is submit new records either through the bulk upload or with the form for those 5 taxa. And those would be put into the database, and then you would see, if you search for records for that taxa or those taxa and that garden, you would see the 2 records, one from 2020 and one from 2024, and you would actually be able to see in the table view how they had changed the rank over
Yeah,
here.
so no records would be overwritten or deleted in any manner. This is just a series of individual observations that would tell us a story over time.
Yeah.
Good question. That's an important one too. Okay, so the next question comes, let's see here, so do participants need to have an APGA institutional membership? And we kind of hinted at that. No, we don't require an institutional membership from any particular gardens. Upon the registration process, the information about your garden would be entered and then would be, essentially approved by the administrators of the database, and then that individual would have access to the data. So all the information about the garden, as well as the person and the person's role, would be included in that registration process. So APGA membership is not necessarily required. So Pam has another question here. Is it currently limited to US and Canada locations? So Pam, this is a really interesting question. So when we started this conversation, really the focus was the US and Canada, and that's kind of how we've built this right now. It certainly has applications on a broader scale, and I think value as well. But right now, we have not engaged that higher scale at the moment. We would need to consider additional taxa and entering that into the database and such. And I think, sort of a continental scale is a pretty wide initiative at the moment, but I think we can consider this moving forward. Okay, so Cindy is asking, how are we planning on rolling out to more gardens across North America? So this is part of that process, Cindy. What we're doing is now, advertising this in a way to introduce the idea. We've had a couple of webinars right now, within the last couple of weeks, including this one. We have an upcoming workshop at the annual conference for APGA. And so rolling this out is kind of a process that we're taking sort of a bit slower for now, because we want to make sure that we incorporate feedback as needed in this process. So if we need to make any adjustments to the database to make it more effective, we want to be able to do that before just having a blast announcement that it's out there and it's ready right now. Rolling this out to more gardens is part of the process, but rolling it out to other sectors is also an important component to make this as effective as possible. And so this year, for example, I'll be meeting with the International Plant Propagator Society at their annual meeting in Canada. And so I'll just engage the topic and try to find ways that they would be looking for this information. What means would be the most useful for them. And we need to have more of those conversations with other sectors beyond the plant propagators as well. So we're still kind of in this process, I guess is what I'm trying to say. We're still trying to roll this out over a longer time frame. We're just trying to be careful at the same time and, make this a good product as a result. So if anyone has any particular suggestions on how to do that, we're all ears. But I should also give kudos to APGA. Pam and her colleagues at APGA have been great supporters of this initiative and have actually been very supportive of the initiative since the beginning. They've built this message and about these webinars and about our effort into their newsletters, and have been very kind and have had open ears all along the way. So thank you to everybody at APGA. Okay, Richard is saying, are we aware that the International Plant Propagator Society is meeting in Bellingham, Washington, the same week at APGA in Portland? Personally, no, I'm not aware of that, but I do know that there are several different, divisions of that organization. So there was some conversation between myself and the program coordinator for the Eastern sector of that organization. And maybe there would be follow-up conversation, or maybe posters, or maybe some other presentations given across that whole society in the future. But for now, what we're going to focus on is just having a conversation with the Eastern chapter of the International Propagator Society. So that's kind of where we stand with that. Thank you, Richard. Okay, and if anybody else has questions, we have a few more minutes, so we can hang out and ask questions. If anybody has any challenging questions for Sai about the database, she's sitting here eagerly waiting for questions too about that. So not to put you on the spot, Sai, thank you. But otherwise, yeah, thank you so much for everybody joining today. We're really looking forward to you know, continuing this conversation and working together on this. So thank you. I think that's about it.